At first, it was the silence. The officers stood in my doorway holding a folded flag and a sentence they had probably practiced. My husband was dead. Killed during a night operation, they said. Clean words for something that did not feel clean. I remember nodding. People always assume grief is loud. Mine was quiet. For weeks, everyone treated me like fragile glass. My family moved closer. My sister most of all. She said she would help me understand what happened. She said soldiers keep secrets. I believed her. What I did not know then was that the first lie had already been spoken in that room, and the truth about my husband would not come from the military records. Before the officers arrived at my door, life moved with a quiet rhythm. My husband believed in routines, not because he was rigid, but because routine created calm. In the military, calm was something he respected. It was not excitement or glory that shaped his work. It was preparation, discipline, silence. Every morning began the same way. He woke before sunrise. The house was still dark when I heard the kitchen light switch on, coffee brewing, the low hum of the refrigerator, the sound of the chair sliding across the floor as he sat at the table reviewing something on his tablet. He never spoke about what he read. Not because I asked him not to, because he believed some things belonged to the work itself. People imagine military marriages as dramatic, deployments, emotional farewells, constant fear. Our life was quieter than that. He did not bring the battlefield home, and I did not ask questions he could not answer. Trust does not always mean understanding everything. Sometimes it means respecting what remains unspoken. In the evenings, we ate dinner together in the small dining room beside the kitchen. The window looked out over the backyard fence and the tall maple tree behind it. In autumn, the leaves fell slowly across the grass like pieces of paper drifting down. He liked watching that tree. Sometimes we would sit there long after the plates were empty. No television, no music, just the quiet presence of another person who knew how to be still. My husband was not a loud man. When people visited, they often spoke over him without noticing. He never interrupted them. He waited, listened, then said only what was necessary. There was something about that restraint that made people assume he was less aware than he was. I noticed the opposite. He observed everything. When someone told a story that did not quite match the timeline they described, he would not challenge them. He would simply remember it. Later, sometimes days later, he might mention a small detail that revealed he had understood far more than anyone realized. I learned that from him, not the confrontation, the observation, the patience. Our marriage worked because neither of us required constant explanations. We respected silence as much as conversation. When he left for assignments, he never offered dramatic promises, just simple statements. "I'll call when I can," or sometimes only a nod before walking out the door. Those moments never felt incomplete. They felt sufficient. The last time I saw him was early in the morning. The sun had not fully risen yet. A pale blue light filled the kitchen while he poured coffee into the travel mug he always carried. I remember noticing that he seemed slightly more focused than usual, not anxious. Not distracted, just quiet in a deeper way. He checked his watch twice, then he picked up his bag. "Training exercise," he said. That was all. Those 2 words explained enough. Military schedules changed constantly. Exercises appeared without warning. Plans moved forward quickly and without much discussion. I nodded. He stepped toward the door, then paused. For a moment, he looked back at the dining table, the chair where he usually sat, the maple tree outside the window, small things, ordinary things. I noticed the pause, but I did not ask about it. Not every silence needs to be interrupted. He left. The door closed. The car started, and the house returned to its normal quiet. 3 days later, the officers arrived. They wore formal uniforms that seemed too precise for the gray afternoon outside. There were 2 of them. They stood in the doorway holding a folded flag. One spoke carefully, as if each word had been measured before leaving his mouth. My husband had been killed during a military operation. The sentence was short, almost efficient. There were additional explanations about classified missions and ongoing reviews. Words like service and sacrifice and duty appeared in the conversation, arranged neatly like lines in an official report. I listened. I nodded. I accepted the folded flag when they handed it to me. Grief did not arrive loudly. It settled slowly, like dust across the furniture. That evening, my family began arriving. First my parents, then my sister. She was the last to enter the house. She did not speak immediately. She simply walked into the kitchen, looked at the table where my husband used to sit, and placed her hand on my shoulder. "I'm here," she said. Over the next few days, she became the person who organized everything. Paperwork, phone calls, military forms. She sat beside me while representatives explained benefits and procedures. When conversations became complicated, she asked the questions I did not think to ask. Everyone seemed relieved that she was there, even the officers. They spoke to her easily, as if she understood systems and procedures better than most people. At night, we sat in the living room after everyone else had gone home. The television stayed off. Sometimes she opened her laptop and reviewed documents the military had sent, service records, operational summaries, official correspondence. She read quietly, occasionally highlighting something or saving a file. "You shouldn't have to deal with all this right now," she said once. "I can handle it." I believed her. My sister had always been the organized one, the practical one. If something needed to be understood, she would understand it. And if something needed to be explained, she would explain it. At that time, I trusted two things completely: the system that told me what had happened, and the sister who promised she would help me understand it. I did not realize yet that both of those things were already beginning to shift. The first few weeks after the funeral passed in a slow administrative rhythm. Military deaths come with procedures. Forms arrive in carefully labeled envelopes. Phone calls are scheduled with specific departments. Meetings happen in quiet offices where people speak gently but never casually. My sister handled most of it. She sat beside me at the dining table with her laptop open, a stack of folders arranged neatly to her right. Each folder had a handwritten label: benefits, service record, operational review, personal effects. She worked through them methodically, like someone assembling a report rather than grieving a person. I did not question it. Practical work gave structure to the days. Sometimes a military liaison officer called to confirm details. Other times emails arrived containing documents with sections blacked out or marked with phrases like restricted distribution. Those parts never surprised me. My husband had always said the military recorded everything. It just did not show everything. One afternoon, we received the preliminary summary of the operation. It was only 4 pages long. My sister opened the file first. I watched her eyes move across the screen. There was a brief pause, just long enough to notice. "Anything important?" I asked. She scrolled down quickly. "No," she said, "just the basic timeline." She turned the laptop slightly so I could see it. The report described a night operation conducted by multiple units. The language was precise but distant. Locations were referenced only by coded designations. Personnel were identified by rank or initials. My husband's name appeared once, listed among the casualties. There was no description of the moment itself, just the outcome. Killed during engagement with hostile forces. My sister continued scrolling. "Most of this is technical," she said. "It's not really meant for families." I nodded. That explanation seemed reasonable. Still, something about the timeline caught my attention. The operation had begun at 02:10. Contact with hostile forces occurred at 02:18. Casualties were reported at 02:23. The sequence felt fast, not impossible, just compressed. Did he usually go on operations like this? My sister asked. The question felt oddly specific. I don't know, I said. He never talked about missions. She nodded slowly. Right. She minimized the document and opened another file. The moment passed, but later that evening, after she had gone upstairs to take a call, I found myself thinking about the way she had paused while reading the report. It had not been grief. It had been recognition. I could not explain why that distinction felt important. A few days later, another envelope arrived. This one contained the official notification of personal effects recovered from the operations site. My sister opened the letter while standing beside the kitchen counter. Inside was a short inventory list. Watch, wallet, dog tags, field notebook. The notebook caught her attention. Did he usually carry one? She asked. Yes, I said. He liked writing things down. She looked at the line again. Apparently it wasn't recovered. There was a short explanation beneath the list. Item presumed lost during operational activity. She read the sentence twice. Strange, she murmured. What is? Just that they mention it specifically. I shrugged. Maybe they have to account for everything. She nodded. Yes, probably. But she kept looking at the page for another few seconds before setting it down. The next moment came during a meeting with the military liaison officer. His name was Captain Ellis. He had the calm, practiced tone of someone used to explaining difficult situations. We sat across from him in a small office inside the Regional Base Administration building. My sister had brought a folder with several documents. She placed the operations summary on the desk. There's one thing I wanted to clarify, she said. Her voice was polite, almost casual. In the timeline here, contact occurs 8 minutes after the mission begins. Captain Ellis glanced at the document. Yes. Is that typical? He folded his hands together. It depends on the situation. She nodded. Of course, I just wondered whether the unit expected resistance that quickly. There was a small pause, not long, but long enough for him to choose his next words carefully. Operational expectations vary, he said. Unfortunately, I cannot discuss mission planning in detail. My sister accepted the answer immediately. Understood. The conversation moved on. Benefits, memorial arrangements, administrative follow-up. Nothing dramatic, nothing openly suspicious. But on the drive home, my sister was unusually quiet. She stared out the passenger window while the afternoon traffic moved slowly past us. Finally, she said, almost to herself, 8 minutes is very fast. I kept my eyes on the road. Yes, I said. She nodded slightly. Just an observation. When we arrived home, she went directly to the dining table and opened her laptop again. The operations summary appeared on the screen. She read the timeline once more. Then she closed the document quickly when she noticed me watching. Sorry, she said. I know you probably don't want to keep looking at this. Her tone was gentle, concerned, protective. I believed that was the reason she closed the file, at least at the time. But that night, lying awake in the quiet house, I realized something about the last few days. My sister had been the one asking most of the questions, not me. And the questions she asked were rarely about grief. They were about details, timelines, expectations, procedures, small things that did not look important by themselves. But together they created a pattern I did not yet understand. I still trusted her, completely. But for the first time since the officers arrived at my door, a quiet thought appeared in the back of my mind. Not suspicion, not accusation, just a simple awareness. Something about this operation was making my sister uncomfortable, and she was trying very carefully not to show it. The first real inconsistency appeared in a place no one expected me to notice. A date, not a dramatic discovery, not a hidden confession, just a date that did not align with the others. My sister had printed several documents from the military portal so we could review them without staring at screens for hours. They were arranged in a careful stack on the dining table beside her laptop. Most of the papers repeated the same basic facts: operation name, unit designation, time of engagement, casualties. I had begun reading them slowly in the evenings while the house was quiet, not searching for anything specific, just absorbing what little information existed. That was when I saw it. The operational briefing summary was dated one day earlier than the planning approval document. At first, I assumed I had misunderstood the format. Military paperwork often followed internal structures civilians did not fully recognize, but the order of events seemed reversed. A briefing that described the operation in detail appeared to exist before the official authorization. I read both pages again, then a third time. The difference remained. My sister was sitting across from me working through a benefits form when I spoke. "Did you notice this?" She looked up. "What is it?" I slid the 2 pages across the table. "These dates." She leaned forward slightly and read them. Her reaction was subtle, just a small tightening in her expression. "It's probably just the way they file things," she said. "Maybe," I replied. She studied the papers another moment. Then she picked them up and placed them back into the folder. "These systems aren't always chronological," she added. The explanation sounded reasonable, and yet she did not sound entirely convinced by it herself. That evening she stayed at the table longer than usual. Her laptop remained open as she navigated through several secure document pages the military portal provided to families of service members. I watched quietly from the living room. Her movements were precise, careful. She opened files, closed them quickly, sometimes scrolled halfway down before returning to the index page. Once she opened something that caused her to sit very still for several seconds. Then she closed it immediately. The screen went dark as she lowered the laptop lid. When she looked up and noticed me watching, she smiled gently. "Just organizing everything," she said. I nodded, but I had already noticed the way her breathing had changed during those few seconds. The next sign came during another meeting with Captain Ellis. This time the conversation took place over a video call. My sister had requested clarification about the operational review process. Captain Ellis appeared on the screen in uniform, seated in what looked like the same office as before. The lighting was bright, his posture formal. "We're still waiting for the final report," he explained. "These reviews take time." My sister asked her questions carefully. "What exactly does the review examine?" "Standard procedural evaluation," he replied. "Mission planning, communication, execution. And if something unusual is discovered," his expression remained composed, "then the appropriate department evaluates the findings." The language felt controlled. Every answer complete without revealing anything substantial. My sister nodded politely, but before ending the call she asked one more question. It sounded simple, almost casual. "Was my brother-in-law part of the planning phase for this mission?" Captain Ellis paused. Not long, but the pause existed. "I cannot discuss individual roles," he said. "However, I can confirm that all personnel followed operational protocols." The sentence was technically an answer, but not the answer she had asked for. My sister thanked him and ended the call. The room remained quiet for a moment. Then she leaned back in her chair and stared at the dark laptop screen. "You think he was involved in the planning?" I asked. She hesitated. "I don't know." Her tone was distant, thoughtful. "I'm just trying to understand the structure of the mission." She gathered the printed documents and returned them to their folders. The movement looked slightly mechanical, as if her mind was focused somewhere else. Later that night, she went upstairs earlier than usual. I remained at the dining table with the documents still spread out. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the wall clock. I looked again at the 2 pages with the mismatched dates. Something about them still felt wrong. Not dramatic, just misplaced. Like a piece of a larger structure that had been filed into the wrong slot. Then I noticed something else. A reference number printed in the corner of the briefing summary. It matched a file name I had seen briefly on my sister's screen earlier that evening. A file she had opened for only a few seconds and closed immediately. I could not see its contents, only the name, but the numbers were identical. I sat there for a long time looking at that small sequence of letters and digits. It meant nothing by itself, just an administrative code, yet it connected 2 separate moments. The brief pause when she first read the operation summary, and the file she had closed the moment she realized I was watching. Neither moment proved anything. Neither contained evidence of a lie, but together they formed something new. The first real red flag, not about the military, not yet, about my sister. Until that evening, she had been the person guiding me through everything. The one explaining systems, interpreting documents, asking questions I did not think to ask. Now I realized there were questions she was asking privately. Questions she was not sharing with me. I did not confront her. I did not mention the file name. Observation had always been my husband's strength. Patience had been his method. So I did the same thing he would have done. I waited, and I watched. Because if there was something inside those documents my sister did not want to show me, the system that created them would eventually reveal it. Systems always leave traces, even when people try to close the file quickly. By the 4th week, the house had grown quieter again. Most relatives had returned to their routines. The sympathy calls slowed. The constant presence of people moving through the rooms faded until it was mostly just my sister and me again. She stayed often, sometimes overnight, sometimes only during the afternoons when paperwork arrived. At first, I appreciated the structure she created. Without it, the days would have blurred into something shapeless. But as the documents continued to arrive, the pattern of our conversations began to change. The more closely I read the reports, the more carefully people responded to my questions. It started with something small. One evening, I mentioned the mismatched dates again. My sister was reviewing a benefits form while I sat across the table with the folder of operation documents. "I still don't understand this part," I said, sliding the pages toward her again. She glanced at them briefly. "We talked about that already." "I know, but the sequence still doesn't make sense." She exhaled softly, leaning back in her chair. "These reports aren't written for civilians, they're structured differently." "I'm not asking for the structure," I said quietly. "I'm asking why the briefing appears before the authorization." Her fingers rested on the edge of the table. For a moment, she did not answer. Then she closed the folder gently. "You're looking too closely at things that probably don't matter." Her tone was calm, reasonable, but the words carried a subtle shift, not explanation, correction. "I'm just trying to understand," I replied, "and I'm trying to help you avoid unnecessary stress." The phrase settled in the room like a quiet warning. Unnecessary stress. It suggested the problem was not the document. The problem was my attention to it. I did not argue. Instead, I placed the pages back in the folder. The next time it happened was during a phone call with Captain Ellis. My sister had scheduled another follow-up regarding the operational review. I listened quietly while they spoke. He explained that certain elements of the mission remained classified. The investigation process would eventually produce a final summary, but details would remain restricted. My sister thanked him for the update. Then I asked a question. Was there any indication before the mission that something might go wrong? The line was silent for a moment. Captain Ellis cleared his throat slightly. Operational risks are always considered. That's not what I meant, I said. Were there concerns? My sister shifted slightly in her chair beside me. Captain Ellis answered carefully. Every mission undergoes extensive planning. I can assure you that the appropriate procedures were followed. I waited, but that was all he offered. My sister leaned closer to the phone. We understand, she said gently. Thank you for clarifying. The call ended shortly after that. She closed her laptop and looked at me with a small, patient smile. You don't need to push them like that. I wasn't pushing. You kind of were. Her tone remained calm, but there was something new in it, a subtle firmness. They've already explained what they can, she continued. Military operations involve things we simply don't have access to. I nodded slowly. That doesn't mean the timeline should be confusing. She shook her head slightly. You're focusing on fragments. Without the full context, they can look misleading. The sentence sounded logical, almost protective. But again, the message underneath it felt familiar. Stop looking too closely. A few days later, our parents visited. We sat together in the living room while my sister made tea in the kitchen. My mother asked how I was sleeping. My father asked whether the benefits paperwork was moving forward. I answered quietly. Then I mentioned the timeline again, not as an accusation, just an observation. There are some inconsistencies in the reports. My father frowned slightly. What kind of inconsistencies? Small things, dates, sequences. Before I could say more, my sister returned carrying the tea tray. She set the cups down carefully. Military documentation is complicated, she said lightly, especially when parts are classified. My father nodded. That makes sense. My mother looked at me gently. You've been reading those reports a lot. I just want to understand what happened, I said. My sister placed a cup in front of me. And you will, she replied softly. But sometimes focusing on technical details makes things harder emotionally. There it was again, a subtle redirection, the implication that my questions came from grief rather than reason. My parents exchanged a quiet glance, not suspicious, just concerned. You've been through enough, my mother said. Maybe it's okay to let the investigation finish. I looked down at the tea in my hands. The steam drifted upward slowly. No one in the room sounded hostile. No one raised their voice, but the effect was unmistakable. Every path that led toward the details of the operation gently curved away again, not by force, by reassurance, by concern, by calm explanations about complexity and emotional strain. If someone had shouted or argued, it would have been easier to recognize. Instead, the pressure appeared in softer forms. Questions answered with broader statements. Concerns reframed as misunderstandings. Curiosity interpreted as grief. The message was never spoken directly, but it became clearer each time. Stop asking. Stop examining. Let the system handle it. That night after everyone left, my sister remained at the dining table again with her laptop. The glow of the screen lit her face in the dark room. I walked past quietly and saw a document open on the screen. A long file filled with dense paragraphs and internal references. The same reference number I had noticed before appeared at the top. She saw me and quickly minimized the window. Just more paperwork, she said. I nodded. I did not challenge her. But in that moment, something important became clear. The people telling me not to focus on the details were the same people who were reading those details themselves, very carefully. My sister closed the laptop and stood. You should get some rest, she said gently. It's been a long month. I agreed. Because arguing would not reveal anything. Observation would. And for the first time since the officers arrived at my door, I understood something about the silence surrounding my husband's death. The resistance was not loud. It was careful, measured, almost protective, as if the truth about that operation was something everyone preferred to keep quiet, even the people closest to me. The discovery did not arrive dramatically. There was no sudden confession, no emotional confrontation, no moment where someone finally decided to tell the truth. It appeared the way most important things appear inside bureaucratic systems, as a file, hidden in a place where no one expected anyone to look twice. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. My sister was sitting at the dining table again with her laptop open, navigating through the secure portal that stored archived military correspondence. By then, she had developed a routine for reviewing documents. She organized everything into folders on her computer, labeling them carefully so we could find them later. I sat in the living room reading through a printed benefits guide. The house was quiet. Then I heard her stop typing. Not a loud reaction, just the absence of movement, a stillness. I looked toward the dining table. She was staring at the screen without blinking. "What is it?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers rested lightly on the keyboard as if she had forgotten they were there. Finally, she said, very softly, "I think this might be something." I walked over slowly. "Something what?" She tilted the laptop toward me. "It's a message thread." The screen showed a short internal communication between several officers involved in the operation. Most of the lines were technical, scheduling notes, brief procedural confirmations, but near the bottom was something different. A message sent 2 days before the mission. It came from my husband. The subject line read, "Operational planning concerned." The message itself was brief, direct. It referenced a discrepancy in the intelligence summary used during mission preparation. According to the note, certain reconnaissance data did not match the location details included in the operational briefing. The message was not emotional. It was precise, a professional observation. The kind of comment someone trained to examine details might submit without expecting it to become controversial. Below it were 2 responses. One officer acknowledged the message. Another replied that the issue had been reviewed and determined not to affect the mission timeline. The thread ended there. My sister read it again, then again. "This was 2 days before the operation," she said quietly. "Yes." He noticed something wrong. The words hung in the air between us, not dramatic, just undeniable. I leaned closer to the screen. "Is that the full conversation?" She scrolled down. "There's an attachment reference," she said, but the attachment itself was missing. The system displayed a short note beneath the thread, "File unavailable, restricted archive." My sister sat back slowly. "That means it was moved somewhere else." "Why?" "Usually because it becomes part of a formal review." The room remained silent for several seconds. I read the message again. The tone felt familiar. My husband had always communicated that way. Calm, focused, never exaggerating. He had simply pointed out a detail that did not match the larger picture, and someone had acknowledged it, then dismissed it. "What does the discrepancy mean?" I asked. She hesitated. "I don't know yet." Yet. The word was quiet but significant. She opened a new window on the laptop and began searching through archived reference numbers connected to the message. Several additional files appeared in the results. Most were labeled with restricted classifications, but one document opened. It was a short internal report summarizing procedural concerns raised during the mission planning stage. The report listed 3 separate observations submitted by different personnel. My husband's message was the second entry. The other 2 were shorter but similar. Each one identified a small irregularity in the intelligence briefing. different details, different wording, but the same underlying concern. Information that did not fully align. None of the entries recommended canceling the mission. They simply noted inconsistencies. Each one received the same response. Reviewed, determined not to affect operational viability, my sister leaned back in her chair. They saw the concerns, she said quietly. They just decided they weren't serious enough. I sat across from her, looking at the screen. Did anyone follow up after the mission? She scrolled further down. The report ended with a final note. All planning stage concerns incorporated into post-operation evaluation. That means the review process should include them, she said. But the summary we received never mentioned any of this. No. The realization settled slowly. The official documents sent to families had described the mission as a straightforward engagement. They did not mention internal concerns. They did not mention the message my husband had written. They did not mention the other personnel who noticed irregularities. Those details existed only inside the deeper archive. My sister closed the file halfway, then opened it again, as if confirming it had not disappeared. This is probably why the investigation is still open, she said, because of the planning concerns. Do you think they ignored them? Her answer came carefully. I think they evaluated them and decided the mission could still proceed. The distinction was subtle, but meaningful. Someone had seen the warning and continued anyway. My sister closed the laptop slowly. For the first time since we started reviewing the documents, she looked uncertain, not confused, concerned. This doesn't mean the mission failed because of that discrepancy, she said. I know, but it means he noticed something. Yes, and he recorded it. That part mattered more than anything else. My husband had not simply had a feeling. He had written the observation down, inside the system, where it could not be erased without leaving a trace. The silence between us deepened. Then my sister said something that surprised me. I didn't expect to find that. Her voice carried a quiet tension, as if the discovery had placed her somewhere she had not intended to stand. You've been searching for something, I said gently. She shook her head. No, then she paused. Not exactly. She closed the laptop completely. We should probably wait for the official review to finish. The sentence sounded familiar. It echoed the same language the liaison officers had used. Let the system handle it. But now we both knew something the official summaries had never mentioned. Before the operation began, my husband had already identified a problem. He had written it down, and the system had acknowledged it, then moved forward anyway. The truth had not fully surfaced yet, but it had begun to leak through the records, quietly, one document at a time. After we found the message, the atmosphere in the house changed. Nothing visible at first. The furniture remained in the same places. The same documents rested inside the same folders on the dining table. My sister still opened her laptop each afternoon to organize records and emails. But something had shifted beneath the routine. It felt like standing in a room where the air pressure had quietly dropped. No one spoke about it directly, yet the discovery existed between us. My husband had submitted a planning concern before the operation, and the system had chosen to proceed. 2 days later, my sister logged into the military portal again. The message thread was still there, but the related report we had opened the previous afternoon was gone. Not deleted, just replaced with a short notice. Document moved to restricted archive. She stared at the screen for several seconds. That's new, she said. I walked over. Does that mean it's classified? More restricted than before. Because of the investigation? Probably. But her tone suggested she wasn't completely certain. She opened the activity log connected to the document. Every archived file inside the portal recorded when it had been accessed. A small table appeared on the screen. Date, time, User credentials. My sister read the list slowly. This report was opened 4 times in the last 48 hours, she said. By who? She pointed at the screen. Each entry contained only internal department codes. No names, but the pattern was clear. The file had been reviewed repeatedly after we accessed it. Someone inside the system had noticed. They monitor this portal, she said quietly. That makes sense. Yes, but she continued staring at the activity log longer than necessary. Do you think they know we opened it? I asked. They know someone did, and that matters. It might. The sentence sounded cautious, measured. My sister closed the window and leaned back in her chair. We should probably avoid downloading anything else for now. I watched her carefully. You're worried about something. She hesitated, then shook her head. No, I just don't want to complicate the investigation. The explanation felt reasonable. Still, the tension in her voice remained. Over the next few days, communication from the military changed. Before the discovery, Captain Ellis had returned calls quickly. Now responses arrived through formal emails instead of conversations. Each message contained the same tone: professional, polite, distant. One afternoon, we received an official notice informing us that the operational review had entered a secondary evaluation phase. The language was careful. Additional procedural documentation is currently under examination. No details, no explanations, just confirmation that the process had expanded. My sister read the message twice. They're looking deeper, she said. Because of the planning concerns? Possibly. Later that evening, she stayed longer than usual after dinner. The laptop remained closed in front of her. She did not open it. Instead, she sat quietly at the table staring at the dark screen. You knew something before we found that message, I said finally. The words were calm, not accusatory, just an observation. She looked up slowly. What do you mean? You were already searching through the planning records. Her fingers rested lightly on the table. I told you I was organizing the documents. Yes, but you were looking for something specific. She held my gaze for several seconds, then she exhaled softly. Your husband contacted me once. The sentence landed quietly. When? A few days before the mission. What did he say? He asked me something strange. My sister's voice remained controlled, but there was tension beneath it. He wanted to know whether I could help him access archived intelligence references. Why you? Because of my work. She worked in data analysis for a civilian research firm. Her job involved navigating complex information systems. The skill translated easily into other databases. I thought it was just curiosity, she continued. He said he noticed a discrepancy in the reconnaissance reports and wanted to verify something. And you helped him. I tried. She looked down at the table. But the archive he needed required military clearance levels far beyond what I had. So he handled it himself. Yes, she paused. When the officers came to your door, I remembered that conversation. The pieces began aligning slowly. That's why you were searching the planning files. Yes, you thought it might be connected. I wasn't sure. Until we found the message. She nodded. The silence returned. But now it carried a different weight. My sister had not been randomly exploring documents. She had been following a thread my husband had started before the mission even began. What do you think he found? I asked. I don't know. But it worried him enough to record it. Yes. She finally opened the laptop again, not the military portal this time. Instead, she opened a folder on her personal computer where she had stored copies of the files we were allowed to keep. She began comparing the planning summary with the operation timeline again. Slowly, methodically. The way my husband used to examine details when something did not match the larger picture. After several minutes, she pointed at a line near the top of the planning document. This reconnaissance reference number, she said. It appears again here. She scrolled down to another section. And here. The same reference appeared 3 times in different parts of the report, but the location coordinates attached to it changed slightly each time. Small differences. A few digits in the grid. Not dramatic enough to stand out unless someone compared them carefully. Those coordinates shouldn't shift like that, she said. What does it mean? It means the intelligence source might have been inconsistent, and the mission planning relied on it anyway. Yes, the implication hung quietly in the room. The operation may have been based on uncertain information. My husband had noticed. He had written it down. The system had reviewed the concern, then approved the mission. My sister closed the document slowly. The investigation will eventually see this, she said. They have access to everything. Yes, but the question is whether they will acknowledge it. I looked at the dark screen. My husband's observation had entered the system before the mission. Now the system itself was reviewing the consequences. No dramatic confrontation, no accusations, just records moving through channels of authority, quietly exposing the cracks inside the structure that once dismissed them. And for the first time since the discovery, I understood why my sister had seemed nervous. Not because she feared the truth, because she knew the truth had already begun moving through a system powerful enough to bury it, or reveal it. And once that process started, no one outside the structure could control where it ended. After the conversation about my husband's message, the house felt different. Not tense, not chaotic, just heavier. The documents on the dining table no longer looked like paperwork meant to explain a loss. They looked like fragments of a system trying to explain itself. My sister continued reviewing files each afternoon, but she worked more slowly now. Before opening anything new, she would sit for a few moments staring at the laptop as if deciding whether it was wise to continue. I understood the hesitation. Once you see a pattern inside a structure, it becomes difficult to pretend the pattern is accidental. 3 days passed without new messages from the military. No calls from Captain Ellis. No updates about the investigation. The silence itself felt intentional. One evening, my sister closed the laptop earlier than usual. "We need to talk about something," she said. Her voice was steady, serious. I sat across from her at the table. "What is it?" She folded her hands together. "There's another archive." "What kind?" "One that isn't connected to the family access portal." I waited. "It's where internal reports are stored during active investigations," she continued. "You can access it, not officially." The words settled quietly in the room. "You already tried, didn't you?" She did not answer immediately. Then she nodded once. "Yes, when?" "Last week." That explained the tension I had noticed in her earlier searches. "What did you find?" I asked. "Very little. The permissions are extremely restricted. But you saw something." Her eyes moved briefly toward the dark laptop screen. "There was a reference to your husband's message." "What kind of reference?" "A procedural flag." She spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully. "When a concern raised by personnel becomes relevant to an investigation, it gets marked for review." And his message was marked. "Yes, that's normal, right? In theory. In theory. In practice, it means the concern might have been more significant than the original response suggested." The silence between us stretched. "So the system knew the concern mattered," I said quietly. "Eventually, yes." "And they still sent him on the mission." She did not answer. Instead, she leaned back slightly in her chair. "I shouldn't have accessed that archive," she said. "It could create problems." "For who?" "For everyone involved." The phrase sounded familiar. A version of the same caution we had heard from military officials: avoid complications, allow the process to unfold. I looked at the folders spread across the table. "My husband noticed something wrong," I said. "He wrote it down." "Yes." The system reviewed it. Yes. And then the mission continued. Her eyes remained steady. That's what the records suggest. The conclusion felt strangely calm, not explosive, not dramatic, just an alignment of facts. The planning intelligence had inconsistencies. My husband had recognized them. He had documented the concern through official channels. Someone above him had acknowledged the message. Then the operation moved forward. The cost of that decision now sat quietly inside my house in the form of a folded flag. My sister watched me carefully. "You don't seem angry," she said. "I'm not." That surprised her. Most people would be. Anger wouldn't change the documents. She nodded slowly. The truth had already been written, not by witnesses or emotional accounts, by the system itself, every message, every timeline entry, every internal reference number. They formed a record that no argument could erase. "I keep thinking about something," my sister said. "What?" "The moment he decided to send that message." Her voice softened slightly. "He knew it might delay the mission. He knew it might irritate people above him." "Yes, but he recorded the concern anyway. That sounds like him." She looked down at the table. "It also means he expected the system to evaluate it seriously." That sentence carried the weight of the entire situation. My husband had trusted the structure he worked inside. He believed that when someone documented a discrepancy, the process would respond. Maybe it had. Maybe the concern had been reviewed carefully. Maybe someone had decided the risk was acceptable. Or maybe the warning had simply become another line in a report. None of those possibilities would bring him back. The question now was what to do with the knowledge that remained. My sister broke the silence. "We could stop here." "What do you mean?" "Let the investigation run its course. And avoid accessing anything else." Her tone was cautious, protective. "The system will eventually produce a final report." "Yes, but we already know something that report might not include." "That's possible." I looked at the laptop. The closed screen reflected the dim light above the table. "Do you want me to keep searching?" she asked quietly. The question hung between us. If she continued digging through restricted archives, there could be consequences. Not dramatic consequences, but professional ones. Legal ones, the kind that appear slowly through official notices and quiet disciplinary procedures. My husband had trusted the system. That trust had not saved him, but it had created a record. A trail of documents that now existed whether anyone chose to acknowledge them or not. "I don't want you risking your job," I said. She studied my face. "You're sure?" "Yes." "And you're comfortable waiting?" I nodded, because in that moment something became clear. The truth no longer depended on us forcing it into the open. The system already possessed the evidence. Internal flags, planning reports, message archives. The investigation had access to all of it. If the structure that recorded those warnings still believed in its own procedures, the consequences would eventually appear. Quietly, without speeches, without public confrontations, just like everything else inside that system. My sister closed the laptop completely. For the first time in weeks, the dining table was empty again. No glowing screen, no folders, just the quiet room and the sound of the clock on the wall. We had reached the point where pushing harder would not reveal anything faster. Now the weight of the truth belonged to the system that created the records, and systems move slowly. But when enough documentation exists, they rarely remain silent forever. The first sign did not arrive as an announcement. There was no phone call explaining that the investigation had discovered something important. No official letter admitting that the planning concerns had been overlooked. Instead, the change appeared in the quiet way systems begin correcting themselves. It started with a message from Captain Ellis. Not a call, an email, short, formal. He informed us that the operational review had progressed into an administrative reassessment of the planning process connected to the mission. Several personnel involved in the preparation phase had been reassigned temporarily while the review continued. No names, no explanations, just the language of internal procedure. My sister read the message twice. "That's significant," she said quietly. "Why?" "Reassignments usually mean the review found something worth examining closely." The sentence remained carefully neutral, but the implication was clear. Someone inside the system had begun following the same trail of documentation we had seen weeks earlier. The planning concerns, the intelligence discrepancies, the messages recorded before the mission. I closed the laptop after reading the email. "What happens next?" I asked. "More reviews," my sister said, "possibly interviews with personnel who were involved. And the final report. That takes time." Weeks passed. Life slowly returned to a quieter rhythm. The house no longer felt like a place filled with documents and investigation updates. Most days passed without any communication from the military at all. But occasionally something small would appear. Another brief email. A notice about administrative adjustments within the unit. Once we received a letter confirming that an internal oversight board had been assigned to review procedural compliance during the planning stage of the operation. The language was careful. Every sentence constructed to avoid assigning blame directly, but the pattern was visible. The system had not dismissed the concerns. It had absorbed them, processed them, moved them upward through layers of authority. One afternoon, my sister arrived carrying a printed article from an internal military publication. She placed it on the dining table. "What is it?" I asked. "It's not public news," she said. "Just an internal bulletin." I read the short piece slowly. It described recent procedural adjustments implemented after a review of mission planning protocols within several operational units. The article never mentioned the specific mission, but it referenced the importance of verifying intelligence consistency before authorizing deployment. It also described new guidelines requiring additional documentation when personnel raised pre-mission concerns. I looked up. "This is about that operation." "Yes, they're changing the procedures." That usually means the review found something serious enough to justify it. The article never mentioned my husband's message. It never referenced the internal reports we had seen. But the connection was unmistakable. The system had examined its own records, and the records had forced a response. A quiet one, but real. A few weeks later, the final communication arrived. Not dramatic, just a formal envelope delivered by mail. Inside was a revised operational summary. The language was slightly different from the original document we had received months earlier. Near the end of the report, a new paragraph had been added. It acknowledged that procedural inconsistencies in the intelligence review process had been identified during the investigation. The report stated that corrective measures had been implemented to ensure future mission planning incorporated additional verification stages. There was no mention of individual responsibility. No detailed explanation of what had happened inside the planning meetings, but the statement confirmed something important. The system had recognized the failure, quietly, without assigning public blame. My sister placed the document back on the table. "That's as close to an admission as they usually make," she said. I nodded. The folded flag still rested in the wooden display case on the shelf beside the living room window. The same place it had been since the day the officers brought it to the door. For a long time, I stood there looking at it. My husband had noticed the problem before the mission began. He had written the message, submitted the concern, trusted the system to examine it. The system had responded slowly. But eventually, the records forced something to change. Procedures were revised. Personnel were reassigned. Future missions would now require additional verification when intelligence reports did not match. No one from the military ever called to explain that those changes had begun with his message. His name did not appear in the revised report, but the documentation existed, inside the system, filed somewhere among thousands of other records. A message written 2 days before a mission. A small observation about intelligence data that did not align. It had not stopped the operation, but months later, the record had still spoken. Quietly moving through the structure until the structure could no longer ignore it. The house eventually returned to the kind of silence it had before everything began. Not the heavy silence of grief, just the normal quiet of ordinary days. My sister visits less often now, not because we argue and not because there is anything left to search for. There are simply no more documents arriving, no more updates from the investigation. The system finished its work. One afternoon, we sat together in the living room looking through a small box of my husband's personal things the military had returned months earlier. Inside were photographs, a watch, and a few handwritten notes from old training exercises. Nothing connected to the mission itself. Those records remained inside the archives where they belonged. My sister closed the box and rested her hands on top of it. "They never mentioned his message in the final report," she said quietly. "No." "They changed the procedures, though." "Yes," she nodded slowly. "That means someone read it." I looked toward the window. Outside, the maple tree behind the fence had begun losing its leaves again, the same quiet pattern of falling shapes across the yard. My husband had always liked watching that tree in autumn. Sometimes we would sit at the dining table long after dinner, saying nothing while the leaves drifted down. Back then, I never thought about the systems he worked inside, the reports, the procedures, the records. I only knew that he believed in them, believed that careful observation mattered, that if something did not match the facts, someone should write it down, not to argue, not to accuse, just to make sure the truth existed somewhere. Months after his death, the system eventually acknowledged the discrepancy he had noticed. Not publicly, not with speeches or recognition, just a paragraph in a revised report and a quiet set of procedural changes inside an institution that rarely explains itself. My sister stood and placed the box back on the shelf. The room grew still again. There was no celebration, no sense of victory, only a simple understanding that somewhere inside the archives of that system, a small record remained. A message written by a man who noticed something wrong and refused to leave it unwritten.